Hey everyone, so I came across this post on Reddit. It's a few days old at this point on the source of all wisdom, the r/gamedev subreddit. And I think it talks about an interesting topic, also one that's interesting for me as a game dev YouTuber and a professional guy who gives advice on the internet, which is that conventional game development advice seems very contradictory. As in, the exact pieces of advice that he's even talking about here don't really matter. It's more that you can have two pieces of game dev advice. One is like TikTok is great for marketing and visibility. The other one is nobody is getting wish lists from TikTok. And both of them are technically true and also cancel each other out. And you're just sitting there as the poor game developer who is like, what now? And this goes even further, for example. It's things of like, hey, make big games versus me saying, hey, make small games. And for some people, making larger scoped games. 100% the way to move. They make generational wealth by focusing for 5 years on one single game. And then you have like us on the other hand, who is also like doing pretty okay. And not even us, but like there's a lot of other developers who are very much in that mindset of 3 to 6 to 9 months of development time per game. And they are making bank from that approach as well. So there's all of this advice, but which ones should you actually listen to? And I guess that's less of what I'm going to be giving an answer to here, but I want to kind of give you some of the rules to know when listening or taking game dev advice. What you should keep in mind basically when a guy on the internet tells you you should do XYZ for your game, or you should do this for your game, or you should get a publisher, or you shouldn't get a publisher, because there are just so many options. And I think the first thing, and something that we need to talk about as well for this channel, is that you need to keep in mind when people give advice is kind of the profile of who are they addressing. I think that's something that I struggle with on this channel as well, and maybe you may feel this as well, where I see Bite Me Games as a channel aimed at other people who are in our situation. They are taking their game development professionally. Either they are already, like they released like a few games before and they kind of can actually run game development as a full-time like thing. Maybe they're not going to be rich, but they can sustain themselves making games. Or they're like, putting in a lot of hours, still 20, 30 hours a week to make this game dev thing work. But of course, there's a lot of you guys as well who are faffing about in Godot a few hours a week and that's it. And you're making just platformers and simple games and all of that. And the advice that I say to the people who are like my people, who are the people like me, who are kind of trying to go on this full-time, if they aren't full-time yet, and if they are full-time to kind of be better at being full-time, is not going to be the same advice that I would give to someone who's making a platformer game for fun, or a game about, like one of my favorite examples is like a viewer, and he's like, yeah, I really want to make a game together with my son about capybaras or guinea pigs. I think guinea pigs. And of course, what am I gonna tell that guy? Make small games, you should focus on making small games. Of course not. He has a completely different set of goals than I do. If he wants to just make a game about guinea pigs and he's not planning on releasing that game on Steam or anything like that, then I am not in a position to be like, hey, but you should think about market research and validation and all of those things, because it doesn't matter for him. And it's not just, the studio mindset, it's also the game, for example. Something like, hey, you don't need to use a publisher. Once again, it's very different depending on the genre, depending on the scope, and depending on those things. If you are making a game that you're maybe thinking of doing early access, it's a management game, it takes like multiple years of development. Yes, a publisher makes sense. If you're making a streamer-based game that's just about riding around on unicycles in like a month, I don't know who would do that, you shouldn't even consider publishers. In both cases, the advice is true, but on one of them, the advice is don't use publishers. On the other one, the advice is use publishers. I think, just to like a little side tangent, so there's this thing we do that I think is really nice on this channel, which is the Bite Me viewer call-ins or something like that. It's a live stream we do about once every 2 months. You may have seen it. If not, I think it's some excellent second monitor content where I go on a live stream and for between 5 and 8 hours, basically nonstop, viewers come in, they talk to me about their situation, what they're dealing with and all of that. And then I help them basically. It's like, okay, you get 20 minutes with me. What are you working on? What's like your goals and all of that? And you'll notice as well that in those like 5 or 8 hours, I give a lot of almost conflicting advice as well, where one time I'm like, yeah, you should just cancel this game. And then the other time I'm like, yeah, this has great potential. You should go and try and find a publisher. And the other time, like, just ship it as fast as possible, because a lot of it comes down to who are you? What are your goals? How much time you have? And what's the game you're making? I think that is the the first important thing, I'm gonna link the latest stream, or like one of the best ones that we did, I think, down below, because it is some really good content. And I think that one really shows you, one, what the average Bite Me viewer is like working on, and two, also shows you how like equal advice can have different results for different people. I think another problem that we need to talk about is that game dev advice has a pretty rapid half-life. What's a half-life? It's not a game. I mean, it's also a game, but in this case, half-life means like, you know, if I give you a piece of advice that is like 100% accurate of, for example, you should be making incremental games right now. This is not like really great anymore. If you gave that advice a year ago, like right before that big wave of incremental games started, that's when you would have started ideally working on an incremental game. So you were there with a finished game right when games came out, like Fill Up the Hole, Norp Epilogue, games like that, Tower Wizard. And now 6 months later, making an incremental game has lost a lot of value, or to be more specific, making like a node buster, like, because we're talking in current terms. And 6 months from now, once again, that advice is almost going to be like sabotaging your competition of like, yeah, if you want to make money, trust me, bro, you should make an incremental game or a node buster, like, knowing that they're going to fail and nobody wants that game anymore. It's similar with like, hey, making a Survivor, like, there is a very big half-life for it. Another similar one could be, hey, find a Kickstarter. Kickstarter used to be very big 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when there was way more money, or finding publishers. That has a half-life as well, where, you know, in 2022, publisher money was great. 2023, it was a little bit less, you know, it keeps going down. And that is something that you need to keep in mind as well. When was this specific piece of advice given? For when did it really start? Like making demos and vertical slices for your game first, before you actually worked on the big game, if you were doing like these large scale projects, was very good game dev advice in 2018. I would never give anyone that advice in 2026 anymore, but if you have to be honest, 2018, that was great game dev advice. I don't know how long the exact half-life is for game dev advice, but I think honestly 6 months half-life. So that means like, you know, if something is 100%, let's go, this is a great idea. 6 months later it's like, 50-50. And then 6 months later it's like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore. Maybe a little bit more. Between 6 months and a year, I would say, is the general half-life for most of the game dev advice out there, I would say. Some things, of course, don't change, like don't overscope. Those things stay similar, but I'm talking more about those specific things of like, oh, you should use TikTok or you should use LinkedIn for advertising your game or whatever. Those more specific things, I would be very careful about when they were said, basically. Then we get kind of the problem, which is partially also the game dev YouTubers. I don't know, which is survivorship bias. This is always going to be something where this is like, you know, the guy who made $1 million from his first game being like, oh, but I didn't do marketing and I just made a great game and that's all you need to do. And them making that video with the catchy title and thumbnail or the catchy postmortem on Reddit. And everyone else being like, hey, but this guy, he didn't do marketing. He didn't do Next Fest. He did none of those things. So I have to do that now as well. I have an example for this. For MMO98, we did not do any marketing before the Steam Next Fest. Zero. The store page and the demo weren't out up until basically right before the Steam Next Fest. We went into the Steam Next Fest with like a few hundred wishlists. And we got over 10,000 wishlists from that Steam Next Fest. So survivorship bias would mean now taking that one piece of data and being like, the new Steam meta and the new Steam strategy is to cold release your game on the Steam Next Fest because it's going to be way better for the Steam algorithm. And I can make up some bullshit story about why I think that is. But in the end of the day, I am one sample point. The only benefit I have is that I am a very, very loud sample point. And a lot of people are going to listen to me compared to the guy who kind of just fades into obscurity. Because, you know, it is success. Nobody clicks a video of like, I got 21 wishlists in the Steam Next Fest. Okay, some people will click it, but the amount of people who actually care about it is going to be way lower. So I would be careful in general of advice where either it's like, this is kind of contradictory, like I said, like, you know, like the Reddit post of like, yeah, you released a game on Kickstarter and it made like $1 million, but I haven't heard of another game. Be wary of that. And I think also be wary of advice that tells you to skip like steps. I think that is something that even I know of, like, for example, not doing the Steam demo like months before the Next Fest and all of that. I know that that is not something that is good to do. That is not a piece of advice that I would give to others, but not everyone has that. Some people are like, hey, yeah, actually Steam Next Fest is completely like not needed. I got my game released without Steam Next Fest. It was just gonna bog me down anyway. And I still made millions of dollars, whatever you see here. But I think that, you know, you should still try to do the best practices. There's the fact that someone else won that lottery ticket doesn't mean that you need to stop doing the bare minimum or like the essentials of game development. There is like a somewhat standardized formula that I would strongly advise you to still keep in mind. And then something else, once again, maybe this is going to be the tinfoil hat section, is that everybody who's saying something at the end of the day does have somewhat of an incentive. No, I don't really have anything to sell you. I have stuff to sell you. Actually, I have stuff to sell you. You can even take this of like where I was earlier. I was like, hey, every piece of advice depends on your exact game. Like, for example, when I mentioned the viewer call-in streams that I did, I'm saying that also knowing that I have a coaching program down below that you can click on, or like not a full program, but you can basically just book a call with me where I'm going to talk one-on-one with you about how you can make your game like better and like give you the direct advice. I am incentivized to tell you that because every time that someone books that, I get money. Of course, I do believe that I give good advice back, but that is kind of the incentive you need to think about as well. It's also of like, you know, publishers are saying, hey, you should only try to find publishers once you already have traction. Because once again, for a publisher, it's good to sign people that were going to be successful anyways with or without a publisher. That's their benefit. Or some people are like, hey, demos are really important for your game. You should really focus on having a great demo and a vertical slice. Here's my course on how to build great demos. It doesn't always even need to be insidious. It could also just be someone who really likes 2D platformers and who is thus going to be biased in his advice regarding making 2D platformers and how it's like, yeah, actually, bro, market totally isn't saturated at all, bro. Just keep making your 2D platformers. You're going to be okay. So it's like, you know, I don't think you need to, every time someone says something, be like, oh, there must be a hidden agenda here, a hidden incentive. I think honestly, you know, this is, okay, hot take. I think critical thinking is overrated sometimes, where you can like listen to all these people who say like, hey, TikTok is good, TikTok is bad. And then some of them are TikTokers and some of them aren't. Or you could just try it out yourself and just be like, whatever, fuck it, we ball. Even if someone says that this is dumb advice and they're trying to sell me something or not, still try it out. You can still do demos. You can still do all of those things, but also don't blindly believe everybody, I guess. You know, nuance is, I think, going to be the most important thing, but also just having, I don't know, this is not a gender neutral term, the balls to try things out yourself is, I think, still an important thing as well. So don't think that everybody who is saying something is immediately trying to sell you something. Like, you know, there are still very nice people out there. I like to think that I am one of those very nice people as well. But still know that even if it's not intentional, there will still be biases with people giving you advice, giving you thoughts and feedback. Like someone who makes large scoped games is most likely also going to suggest you to make large scoped games as well, because that is kind of, you know, what they are used to. It's kind of what they want as well. They want more of these epic adventures, for example, compared to the guy who is shipping out slop every month, for example, but he's making bank from it. He may be like, yo, you should make Roblox games because that's where the money is at right now. Everybody has incentives, whether they know it or not, and they all have biases. And you need to just kind of have like the little like bullshit detector radar somewhat pinging in the background. Don't go on like full-on crusades every time someone gives a piece of advice. I don't think that's worth it, and I don't think that's healthy. You're better off just taking what you want from people, also from people like me, and then discarding the stuff that you do not care about. And then I think the final and honestly most painful truth about game development is that there is a variable in all of the advice that comes down to execution. I can give the exact same game design document or game idea or whatever to two developers, and we would end up with very different games, where you could have once again the saying of like, oh, Steam Next Fest isn't worth it. And it's like, yeah, Steam Next Fest isn't worth it if you have a mediocre or bad looking game that has no hook and no appeal. Whereas Steam Next Fest is very worth it if you have something that grabs viewers' attention, that is interesting, that people want to play. And then the difference, if it's the same game, isn't the advice, but it's just how it's executed. It is how the game is. And that's why I also kind of hammer, or like try to hammer on this channel of like being like, hey, let's raise the bar for the games that we make because they need to be better. I want your games to be better because Execution is a multiplier. There are multiple multipliers in like game development of like how successful your game is going to be. But having a good game, and not just like good from a game design perspective, but also from a visual perspective, from a hook perspective, from an appeal perspective, all of those things is extremely important as well. You can have that same game, that same core concept pitch. You can even have the same asset packs and all of those things. There's challenge videos and all of that from other YouTubers if you want to watch. Different developers at different skill levels will make different games given the same prompt. It's like, you know, if you ask Midjourney versus like Nano Banana Pro or like whichever other like AI tool to generate the same image from a prompt, they're going to give different results. And we are unfortunately humans also kind of like that. And some images or some games are going to inevitably be better than others. And that is part of it as well. Some of the game advice that you see only works if you are capable of making a game that is good enough for that advice to apply to. I guess it kind of boils down to that first point as well of like, you need to have a certain bar or like have a certain profile for the advice to matter. If you cannot make AA quality or triple indie quality games, well, then the advice of joining a show like the Triple I Initiative wouldn't make sense because you wouldn't get selected, you probably wouldn't have the budget, and a bunch of other issues arise. So I don't know what the end goal of this video is. I just kind of want to highlight the biases and the problems that may appear with listening to game dev advice. And I think maybe even a bigger problem that like our audience has is listening to too much game dev advice. I think that's the most important thing. Listening to too much game dev advice is going to make you ping pong between game ideas. It's going to make you ping pong between which engine you should use, which technology you should use, how you should design your game, what genre you should make. You're going to pivot from a 4X to a roguelite to an incremental game. All when you could have just shipped the game in the same time without having to panic. I think the best things you can do at the end of the day are what I like to call N=1 experiments, where you will learn the most by having done the thing yourself. You will always learn more from going through the process of shipping a game, dealing with bundles or whatever, and all the other things in Steamworks, than you will from watching endless videos from me talking about how game development went, from other game developers talking about what they did with their game design, making videos about the entire topic. You will never truly understand what these things are until you've done it yourself. I think a great analogy for this that I've been using recently is it's like knowing that fire is hot. You know, you have like a stove in your home and you turn it on and it's like, it's red hot or whatever. It's not an induction stove, okay? You can look at that stove and you can be like, hey, this is supposed to be hot. And that's kind of like, you know, or like it's the thing of like intelligence versus wisdom in D&D of like, you are aware that you shouldn't touch it because it's going to be hot. But until you have actually put your hand on that hot stovetop one time, until then, you don't really truly understand what it means that, hey, the fire is hot and I shouldn't touch it. And that same thing applies to game development as well. And I guess that is my main takeaway that I want you for this video. It's not to be discouraged by the contradictory advice out there on Reddit and on the internet, but it is to, regardless of that advice, don't get sidetracked, keep making games, and keep working on your game, with the main goal being to have something that is start to finish released. It doesn't even need to be on Steam, but just released on itch first. And once you feel capable, move over to Steam and then burn yourself on the proverbial fire and learn from that. You can then also share your lessons with other people on the internet, of course. Just keep in mind that you will also give that same kind of contradictory advice to someone else potentially. So I hope this kind of gave you some more perspective or was interesting at least. Let me know if there's anything else that I missed, or I don't know, give me a rating on how good you think our game dev advice is. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. If you're new here, we're a game development studio and we're on the road to building $1 million game studio in 2026. If that's something that you're interested in, then be sure to head down below and subscribe, because we upload videos every week on here, 2 times a week. So you get notified whenever we upload them, which is a win-win for both of us, because I get your subscription and you get my videos. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!